A shadow in the corner of your eye, a whisper on the edge of hearing. The classic ghost story almost always begins in isolation, a private terror that separates you from the rational world. But what happens when the veil thins not for one person, but for a dozen? Welcome to EnfinityCast. I'm your host, Vesper Thorne, and tonight we're stepping into the shared nightmare of collective apparitions. These are the mass hauntings, where multiple credible witnesses see the exact same thing at the exact same time. To help us unpack these profoundly strange events, I'm joined by my co-host and fellow explorer of the unknown, Theo Lumis. Theo, welcome.
Thanks, Vesper. It's a fascinating topic because it pushes back so hard against the easy explanations. A single sighting. Skeptics will say it's a trick of the light, a hallucination, maybe even a symptom of infrasound. But how do you explain 2, 5, or 10 people having the identical hallucination, down to the smallest detail? The statistical odds are, well, astronomical.
Exactly. You're no longer dealing with one person's psychology, you're dealing with a shared external event. And perhaps the most famous example of this involves 2 highly rational academic women. Let's talk about the ghosts of Versailles.
The Moberly-Jourdain affair. In August 1901, 2 English academics, Charlotte Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain, were visiting the Palace of Versailles. While walking through the gardens near the Petit Trianon, they described a sudden shift in the atmosphere. It became oppressive, flat, and strangely quiet.
And then they began seeing people, not tourists, but figures in 18th century attire. They saw palace officials with a strange, pockmarked look on their faces, a woman and a girl in old-fashioned dresses, and most famously a woman sketching on the grass who they later became convinced was Marie Antoinette herself.
What's crucial is that they didn't discuss the full extent of it until weeks later. They independently wrote down their accounts and the details matched. They both felt they had somehow stepped into a memory, a moment of history playing out around them. It wasn't a fleeting glimpse. It was a prolonged, shared experience.
It feels less like a haunting and more like a time slip, an environmental recording. But not all cases are so serene. Some are downright terrifying. Theo, tell us about a specific incident at Raynham Hall.
Everyone knows the famous 1936 photograph of the brown lady descending the staircase. But 50 years before that, during a Christmas party in 1835, a much more direct encounter occurred. A guest, a Colonel Loftus, was walking to his room late one night when he saw a woman in a brown satin dress. What unnerved him was that where her eyes should have been, there were only dark, empty sockets. He told others about it the next day. A week later, he and another guest, a man named Hawkins, were on that same staircase, and they both saw her again. They both described the same brown dress, the same aristocratic bearing, and the same horrifying hollow eyes. They even made sketches, Vesper, and the drawings were identical.
Identical sketches. That detail is what sends a shiver down my spine. This isn't mass hysteria where a feeling of panic spreads and people fill in the blanks. This is 2 men seeing a highly specific, non-human detail, the empty sockets, and confirming it with each other. The hallucination theory simply falls apart.
It does. Mass hysteria doesn't create shared, specific visual data. It's the difference between a crowd feeling a sense of unease and a crowd seeing the same license plate on a car that isn't there. One is a shared emotion. The other is a shared objective seeming perception.
So what are we left with? These collective apparitions suggest that some ghosts aren't internal phantoms born of grief or fear. They behave more like a projection, a film being played onto a specific space, visible only to those with the sensitivity to see it.
A residual haunting so powerful, it can be witnessed by multiple people at once. It's an unnerving thought. The idea that history has scars, and sometimes, when the conditions are right, a whole group of people can stumble right into one.
It forces us to ask a difficult question. If you and a friend both see a ghost in the same room, is the strange thing happening inside your heads Or is the strange thing in the room with you? That's all the time we have for tonight. Join us next time on EnfinityCast as we continue to map the edges of the known world. Stay curious.